Welcome to an introduction to educational research. Today's video deals with the term epistemology, or what is reality? What is real? And so we're going to take a look at that. But before we do that, I'd like you to get something to write on, and I'd like you to make two columns, one on the left, one on the right. On the left side, I'd like you to list several things, or as many as you can, those things that you know about education to be absolutely 100% true. Again, I'm not talking about the sort of flowery generalizations that we make, like every child can learn no matter what, and things like that. But things that you absolutely know to be 100% true. And on the other side, on the right side, I'd like you to then list how you come to know this, what your evidence is. So I'd like you to stop the video now and take some time and do this. Then turn the video back on, and then we'll continue on. Well, okay. So first of all, as I said at the beginning, we're going to talk about epistemology, or what is real. And epistemology is the branch of science concerned with the nature and the scope of knowledge. It's actually interested in a theory of knowledge. What is knowledge, and how can it be acquired? What is the extent to which any subject or entity can be known? What is real and what is not real? And how do we know this? This is what epistemology deals with. And what is our evidence level or tolerance level for what is true or not true? In fact, in today's climate, it's a very interesting and important question. I'd like to, before we go on, I'd like to take a look at science versus pseudoscience. This concept of science versus pseudoscience. In science, we start out with systematic observations about the world. So we systematically observe the world, take data, and we look at that data, and that leads to, we analyze the data, and that leads to beliefs and theories about what is real, about what reality is. That's how science works. It starts out with systematic observation about the world, collecting information, analyzing that, and that leads to beliefs and theories about what is real. Pseudoscience, on the other hand, starts out with beliefs or opinions about the world. And those beliefs and opinions lead to what we then consider to be reality. So there's a big difference between science and pseudoscience, and we're going to take a look at that today. And we're going to take a look at sort of how fragile our concepts of reality may be. Let's take a look at this illusion, or this figure. We have a square. This is a square. However, it doesn't look that way because the lines seem to bend in the middle here, and they seem to bend a little bit here. But it is the context. It is this series of concentric circles, the context that this square is placed in, that changes our perception of what is real. If we were to take the concentric circles away, we would be looking at a square. But if we superimpose the square over the concentric circles, we no longer see the reality, the square, but we see something different. So the effects of context on our perception of reality is a huge factor. Okay, let's continue on here. Here's another example of the effect of context on perception, or what we think is real. Now, these lines do not look like they're parallel. In fact, they look like they slant. This looks like it's slanting up. This looks like down. Looks like down. But in reality, these lines are absolutely parallel. But our perception is fooled by the context that they're presented in. So the context that data is presented in really influences on what we see as real and not real. Here's another example of context. These lines are absolutely parallel, but the context that they're in makes it look like they bulge. Now, of course, these are simple illusions. However, this whole idea of context and the context that data is presented in and that we receive it in has great implications for what we interpret as the reality. Here's another example. These two stars are exactly the same color, blue. But the context of the black bars over this blue star and white bars over this blue star gives us the illusion that the two blues are different, that this is a darker blue and this is a lighter blue. Again, the context affects what we perceive as real. Another example of context. This is not quite as startling, but the colors that are outlined in black here seem to be much more vivid than the colors here that are not outlined in black. Again, the context that the data is presented in influences what we see as the reality. Another example of context and perception of what is real. This circle and this circle are exactly the same size. They are exactly the same size. However, this circle looks much bigger because it's in the context, it's presented within the context of these smaller circles, whereas this is presented in the context of the larger circles. So again, the context that surrounds the data that we receive affects what we perceive as reality. There's an interesting thing about the brain. The brain does not like inconclusive information or lack of information. It wants complete information. And if it doesn't get complete information, it will fill in the gaps so that the information appears complete to the brain. Now, here, this looks like three hands holding a triangle, but there actually is no triangle. There is no line here. This white and this white are exactly the same. Same here and same here. Same here and here. Now, there's an indication of a little dark here and here, but this is not a triangle. The brain needs to create the triangle to make sense out of what we're looking at. So many times we will receive information from the world that is incomplete, and so the brain will just fill it in and distort what is really the data that we're looking at. Here's another perfect example. This looks like two triangles, but there are no triangles whatsoever. We have a figure like that, we have that, we have that. But the brain needs to fill in the gap to make sense of this data. So the brain takes information that is incomplete and makes it complete, and therefore distorts the reality that we're seeing. Here's another example. What do you see when you look at this? Do you see one entire face looking at you with sort of a dark mask shadow down the middle, or do you see two faces looking at each other? The brain here will fill in the gap. The brain will switch back and forth between those two images, seeing one whole face and two separate faces, because both have a probability of 50%, and so the brain jumps back and forth between those. Here's another perfect example of how the brain will fill in gaps. You could write a whole sentence with each word misspelled just as long as the first and last letter remain the same. The human brain can still determine what is being written. That's amazing. We can read that sentence, and of course it makes no sense, but the brain will fill it in. Again, the brain will create reality when there is none. Here's an example of the perspective that data that we take in is presented in. These three soldiers marching up the hill here are exactly the same size. From foot to the top, they are exactly the same size. You can pause the video anytime and measure these things. But the perspective that the data is presented in gives us a distorted concept of what is real. Here's another example of perspective. This bowling ball and this bowling ball are exactly the same size. Again, you can stop the video and measure. But the perspective that the data is presented in affects what we see as reality. Our expectations can shape reality also. If we have certain expectations, that will sort of affect how we interpret reality. This looks like Santa Claus here is a little heavier than the elf, and so the seesaw is tilted. This side is down and this side is up. The gap between here and here is exactly the same. Our expectation is that Santa Claus is heavier than the elf, and therefore the seesaw must be tilted that way. And so we see something that is not real and we interpret it as reality. What do you see here? Most people looking at this would see a couple naked in an embrace. If you were under the age of 7, you would not see that. You would see a series of dolphins. If you look here, if you look at the woman's crotch, this is a tail of a dolphin. Here is a dolphin here. Here is another dolphin. Here's a dolphin, a dolphin. This is a dolphin, and a dolphin. Developmental age can also determine what reality is. So a 7 or 8-year-old does not have the sexual experience or images that we have as adults. And so their mind doesn't go that way. And it sees the dolphins, whereas we tend to see the embrace. So even a developmental age can affect what is real or not real. So you're getting a sense that reality is sort of what each of us interprets as reality. Take a minute and consider this quote. We form our beliefs for a variety of subjective, personal, emotional, and psychological reasons in the contexts of environments created by family, friends, colleagues, culture, and society at large. After forming our beliefs, we then defend, justify, and rationalize them with a host of intellectual reasons, cogent arguments, and rational explanations. Beliefs come first, explanations follow. I call this process belief-dependent realism, where our perceptions about reality are dependent on beliefs that we hold about it. Reality exists independent of human minds, but our understanding of it depends upon the beliefs we hold at any given time. And here's the source where that quote came from. And again, this is sort of what pseudoscience is. Beliefs come first, and then reality comes out of beliefs, as opposed to observing the world systematically, analyzing our data, and then drawing conclusions and theories about what is real. So I'd want to go back now to what you wrote down about what you thought were the absolute truths, your absolute truths about education, and how you came to know that. And generally, these are some of the most common responses. We tend to know stuff because of tradition or our prior beliefs. And in fact, there's an interesting story of there are 4 monkeys in a cage. And there are some boxes, and there's a banana hanging from the ceiling. You can see it here. And so one day, one of the monkeys gets the bright idea to stack up the boxes and climb up and grab the banana. And as soon as he tries to do that, the researchers who are outside the cage spray all the monkeys in the cage with cold water. And so then there is a big free-for-all and running around and screeching and screaming. The next day, this monkey gets the bright idea again and stacks the boxes up and goes up and tries to get the banana. And as soon as he does, the researchers shower the entire cage with cold water again. And this happens for several days in a row. Finally, the next day, when the monkey gets the boxes and stacks them up and is going to try and get up and get the banana, what do you think the other monkeys do? Well, they all attack that monkey so that he won't put the boxes there and they won't get sprayed with the water. And so anytime the monkey goes for the boxes, the other monkeys stop him. Well, finally, one of the monkeys dies and the researchers replace the monkey who died with a new monkey. And the new monkey is sort of walking around and sees the boxes and goes to stack them up, but as soon as he goes to stack them up, the other 3 monkeys attack and won't allow him to stack it up. So the monkey learns after several attempts, he's not going to go get those boxes because he's going to get attacked. Well, there are 3 original monkeys and a new monkey. One of the 3 original monkeys dies and they put a new monkey in. And of course the same thing happens. The new monkey tries to stack up the boxes and the other 3 attack. And so the new monkey eventually learns not going to stack up the boxes. Well, the point of the story is eventually every monkey that was original has died off. So there are 4 new monkeys there who have never been sprayed with water. So they don't know anything about the water. But anytime any monkey goes to get on the box, to get the boxes, the other monkeys will attack and prevent it. So that's a matter of tradition taking over when the original reason for what the behavior has long been lost. So tradition is very valuable, but it has some really limitations in terms of what is reality and how we know things. Another way we know stuff is we rely on authorities. Of course, the problem with authorities is you can always get authorities that will say this, and then you'll get authorities that will say that, or like the cartoon here, AT&T says the key to happiness is cheaper long-distance service, but Fruit of the Loom says the key to happiness is nice undies. On the other hand, Pillsbury says, and so you could get authorities and experts to almost agree on anything. So authorities are very valuable, important means of information, but there are many limitations to it also. Logical analysis is another way that we know things. And one of the problems with logical analysis is it's language-based. So it's based on language and not on observation of the real world. And so here you have penguins are black and white. Some old TV shows are black and white. Therefore, some penguins are old TV shows. Logic, another thing that penguins aren't very good at. So this is a syllogism. And if the 2 premises of the syllogism are correct, then the conclusion will be correct. But if one of the premises is not correct or both are not, then the conclusion will not be correct. So logical analysis is valuable also. But it's language-based and not based on collecting data in the real world. Non-consensus reality, things like ESP, those are forms of how people know things. But of course, there are many problems with that. One of the reasons, or one of the major problems, is there's no way of really being able to make a very high degree probability statement that such and such is reality. So it has its limitations also. Faith, another strong basis. Many people have very strong faith beliefs, and that sort of structures their reality. Problem with faith is there are many different faiths, and which one is the one for the real reality? Some people call him Santa Claus, some call him Kris Kringle, some call him St. Nicholas, obviously a victim of identity theft. So which faith is the right faith? So that's some of the limitations with faith. And then common sense, or the experience through our senses. We just saw a whole bunch of examples of illusions that show that that has some serious limitations about interpreting what is real and what is not real. So what we're left with is most of the traditional sources of knowing tend to be unreliable. What we need is a way of knowing that is reliable and valid. And for our sake in this course, the scientific method, which consists of a systematic explanation of a phenomenon using verifiable procedures that can be verified by others, and which is subject to peer review. In other words, others can do the exact same experiment that we did to see if they get the same information. That this is not foolproof, but it's the best that we have in terms of looking at reality. Some of the assumptions of the scientific method is that the world is real and it's material and knowable. We can measure it. We can measure the things in the world. That's an assumption. Events in the world have identifiable causes and effects. That is an assumption of the scientific method. Everyday experiences and logical analysis are not enough. They're not reliable and valid. Scientific inquiry, systematic experimentation, is the most reliable and valid way of trying to identify reality. Here are some characteristics of the scientific method. You can stop the video and take a look at those. By the way, you should probably read chapter 1 in your textbook also, and this does a very nice job of covering the characteristics of the scientific method, and especially deductive, top-down reasoning, and inductive reasoning. Well, that's it for what's real and not real. Here are the resources that were used. Thank you very much for taking a look at the video and for your participation.